Hi everyone, this incident happened about 5 years ago. This is a story that I never really tell anyone because most people are either uncomfortable hearing it or make well-meaning comments about what I should have done in this situation without really understanding how differently your mind works when you're experiencing absolute panic, but you guys seem to get it. So here's my story. I was living in a relatively nice apartment in downtown Memphis, working as an ophthalmic technician. I arrived home from work at my usual time, around 4:30 p.m. I unlocked my door and went inside. I set my phone wallet and keys on the kitchen island, hearing my heavy metal front door swing shut loudly behind me, and I began taking care of some errands around the house. Having grown up in a small town, it was a habit for me not to lock my door during the day, especially when I knew my husband would be home soon anyway. I've never forgotten to lock my door once in the 5 years since this day. I walked through my bathroom and into my large walk-in closet and began hanging up the laundry that I'd started earlier in the day. Before work, my front door opened, and I smiled with surprise. My husband was home a little early, and I have happily called out to him, "I'm in here, love." I was met with silence and slowly began to feel that sinking feeling of something is wrong crawl up my spine. I tried to shake it off, thinking my husband simply hadn't hurt me, and walked out into the living room/kitchen area. Standing on the other side of my kitchen island was a complete stranger. He was male, older than me. I would estimate 50s, but it's hard for me to recall exact facial features or details from this moment, and he was just standing there staring at me. No ski mask, no weapon, just watching me. I wondered if he'd maybe walked into the wrong apartment and was going to apologize and leave, but as he continued to stare, I realized I needed to do something other than just gape at the stranger in my house. I stood tall, puffed up my chest in an attempt to look more threatening, which is hard to do as a small female, and used a clear voice telling him to get out of my apartment, that he had no business being here. He completely ignored me like I hadn't spoken. He then began to pick up my things, my cell phone, my keys, my wallet. He picked them up methodically and put them into his own pockets. That's when it truly hit me that this person was dangerous. I was naive enough to believe this was all a mistake. Until that moment, I darted forward toward the only other device I had that would allow me to get help, my computer. I had to take a few steps closer to the intruder in order to reach it, but still had about 12 to 15 feet between us, so I knew I could grab it and run before he could reach me. As I picked it up and turned to run, I saw him start to move after me. I sprinted back toward the bathroom because it was the only place I could go, and put 2 locked doors between us, my bathroom door and the closet door. I slammed and locked the first door, and within seconds I could hear him messing with it, trying to open it. I ran into the closet and locked that door too, opening my computer and getting on Facebook Messenger to contact my husband. I sent him message after message pleading with him to call 911 and tell him there was an intruder in the apartment. He got the messages within minutes and assured me that he had a dispatcher on the phone and was leaving work himself to try and get to me if he could. I waited and waited. The bathroom door opened and the intruder came inside. He moved to the closet door and started trying to break that door down too. Here's the part where people usually start giving me advice on how I should have acted, but all I can tell you is that I was frozen with fear, with shock. I don't know, but I didn't scream or cry or search for a weapon in that dark closet. I didn't brace the door or try to hold it closed. I just kneeled in my closet and wait to die because I just knew that's what was going to happen. People like to tell me that I lived in an apartment. Surely if I'd screamed, someone would have heard and come to help. Surely there was something heavy enough in my closet to use to defend myself. Hell, even the laptop I had would hurt if I swung it at someone. So why didn't I do anything? I don't really have an answer for that, but the closet door miraculously held. I heard frustrated footsteps go back out into the living area of my apartment. I heard things breaking, bottles shattering, my drawers and refrigerator and cabinets being flung open as things were torn out of them. I continued to sit in that closet, silently crying, wanting to leave, but feeling that death was inevitable. I feel awful about my selfishness in that moment, but I messaged my mom, who lived a 15-hour drive away. I told her what was happening. I desperately wanted comfort and to tell her how much I loved her. I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine the fear and helplessness I put her through knowing her daughter was in danger, and There was nothing she could do to help. She messaged me constantly begging me to keep replying. I told her I would as long as I could, but I also told her to tell my brothers that I loved them to help my husband through whatever happened next. If it ended badly for me, the intruder started messing with the closet door. Again mumbling disjointed words that I couldn't really distinguish. I remember hoping that the police would get to the apartment before my husband, that he wouldn't be the one to find me in whatever state this intruder left me in. The front door opened again, and it was my husband shouting for me. The intruder walked out toward the living room/kitchen area again, and I opened the door and darted from the closet to find my husband on the ground with him pinning him in place. The man kept mumbling at times, yelling, but never really put up much resistance. This entire part is a blur for me. I remember feeling like the room was spinning, filled with fear, mostly for my husband. At this point, eventually the police found the apartment. It took them about 25 minutes to arrive, which still blows my mind. I know time seems to move slowly during scary situations, so I thought it was less than that, but from the time my husband dialed 911 to the officers arriving, it was 25 excruciating minutes. This isn't intended to bash them in any way, it just always they seemed like this was an unusually long response time for a home invasion. They got my things back from the man and took him out of the apartment. I went through the process of filing a police report, telling them what had happened. One of the officers commented that I should really keep my door locked at all times. I remember feeling like he was being insensitive at the time or blaming me for what happened, but I later recognized his words were coming from experience. I'm sure he's seen this situation and differently for other women. Within 30 minutes, the scariest incident of my life was over, but I've carried the fear, the violation, the anxiety of having someone intrude into my space for years. If it happened to me once, it could happen again. If you've made it this far, thanks for listening. Please consider continuing, because this isn't all doom and gloom. If this or something similar has happened to you and you're still struggling with the aftermath of it, the sleepless nights, the laying awake, listening for sounds of forced entry, the nightmares, the constant checking and rechecking of your locks, this is what eventually helped me. A year after this took place, my husband and I moved to the Midwest for his job. We selected a safe town with a nice apartment complex and chose a third-floor apartment with only one point of entry. I looked up every statistic on crime for the neighborhood, finding that an isolated incident of car theft was the only thing reported in decades. I still couldn't sleep at night. It was definitely better than staying in the same apartment in Memphis, but my husband often works night shifts now, and I simply couldn't continue being terrified to sleep at night. I realized my biggest fear wasn't that something could happen again, but that if it did, I was just as unprepared now as I was then. I hadn't changed anything other than locking my front door, and I knew I would likely freeze up again and leave my life up to being able to hide well enough or having a door hold long enough to save me, and that was unacceptable. I walked into a martial arts school with an excellent self-defense program, introduced myself, and started taking classes. At first, I was quiet, hiding in the back of the room and generally keeping to myself. My instructor, who is both incredibly kind and incredibly insightful, slowly built up my confidence and brought me out of my bubble of fear. After several months of training, I finally shared my reason for taking classes with him, and he's worked with me tirelessly to give me the ability to protect myself in any environment, and I've been training for years now, and the difference it has made in every aspect of my life is unbelievable. The meek, quiet girl that waited to die in her closet doesn't exist. I am confident, I am strong, I am worthy of living and protecting myself. In my home, I no longer am ashamed of how I handled the situation I was in, but I also understand what steps I can take to ensure that I'm safe. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but it was worth it. I recognized this might not be a solution or option for everyone. Your experience is valid, and however you decide to cope with your own story is the right choice for you. This is how I happen to do it, and it's worked well for me. Thank you for listening. I'm a bit afraid to share this because I'm not sure how people will respond, but maybe doing so will help someone else that's feeling alone with this. If anyone is struggling with their own story and wants a kind ear to listen, I'm here. Stay safe out there. This story goes way back and thankfully never escalated into anything more than what it was. A period of time that instilled the fear of God in me, but it Also taught me a valuable lesson about internet safety in the cautionary tale, generated from my young naive false security and teenage invincibility. We've all been there at one point or another. When you're young, you don't think about the potential dangers entailing from using the internet with reckless abandon. I knew there were predators out there, but I've never applied much thought in regard to it. Besides the standard precautions, I never gave out my last name or my location to anyone. I knew that much. At least I used to frequent an online message board. It was a tight-knit community. Everyone knew each other on a personal level and were good friends. I had plenty of good friends in my immediate life, but I made many friendships through the site. They are great people, and to this day I'm still in contact with some of them. I even met one of them while on vacation last summer, which was nothing short of a wonderful experience. But there was one user who would different, being a very friendship-oriented community. Everyone was very welcoming of him the moment he joined. But anyone could see that there was always something about him that was off. He was just odd, but at the same time he came off as a sweet and naive character. Wouldn't hurt a fly, we thought. I felt sorry for him. His lack of social grace and people skills had me inclined to believe that he didn't have many friends in his life. I foolishly made the mistake of befriending him, or at least showing him friendliness. It was a short-sighted decision, and one that would result in a long and traumatizing ordeal for me. He became obsessed with me. There's no other way to describe it. I shrugged it off as some weird online crush that would pass. But it never did. If anything, his obsession with me grew stronger every day. It started off small and innocent enough. He'd always praise me and agree with anything I said. Even if my view was dramatically different from his, he would continually single me out and shower me with praise, but always in the seemingly respectful manner. We all thought he was awkward and harmless. Then his antics became fervent. He would hound me multiple times the day to Skype with him. I repeatedly declined, until one day I agreed, if only to verify that he was indeed who he said he was. And at this point almost everyone's identity was verified via group Skype calls. He wasn't necessarily rude or offensive in the beginning, just very awkward and eccentric. I kept the session brief because he made me feel uncomfortable, but I didn't think much of it at the time either. He seemed harmless, albeit strange. I felt sorry for him, honestly, and I didn't want him to be outcast. Nobody ever suspected there to be any element of malevolence in his behavior, but then the qualities I initially dismissed as quirks gradually became something more sinister. He began revealing things about himself to me that he surely knew made me uncomfortable, about how his father would beat his mother, about how he used to torture animals as a child. All of it was purposeful, even if he played it off as being clueless and too socially inept to fully understand the inappropriateness of his behavior at the time. I stopped talking with him after that, but I still didn't completely shut him out. My view of him was that he was socially awkward, but still had no nefarious intent. Nobody suspected anything. He seemed so naive and innocent. Around the time I started getting creepy, mostly perverted anonymous messages, and trolls started flooding the board, personally singling me out as creepy as it was. I took it all with a grain of salt. This wasn't the first time the board was overrun with trolls. We'd had a troll problem for a long time now, and this didn't seem any different. I did not make the connection between any of it and him. One day he asked to join a Skype call between my friend and I. We hesitantly obliged, not wanting to hurt his feelings. To our disgust, he started playing with himself in the call. I cut all ties with him after that, and he apologized profusely before disappearing. I thought that was the end of it, but it was just the beginning. After his vanishing act, the creepy messages became more violent and threatening. I was receiving it at least 100 a day from multiple anonymous guises. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was doing this. Before I knew it, I was being impersonated on multiple accounts throughout social media sites. My inbox became flooded with hundreds of messages threatening to kill, assault, mutilate me in the most barbaric of ways. Every week anonymous accounts would send me collages of pictures of me from sources I never shared with anyone, and of which I had no idea how the person gained access to them. I'd never given out any of my personal social media. In some of these pictures my eyes would be cut out, or the image will be perversely doctored. The board became flooded with multiple anonymous accounts, all posting threatening messages about me. The person even made a website dedicated to his plan to assault and kill me and link me to it, but it was taken down not too long after I started saving everything this nutcase sent to me so I could compile evidence, and requested for performance of an extensive IP check. One of the SOC accounts that was checked matched up with 200 other accounts, including you. Guessed it, his original account. I always knew it was him, but to have confirmed that this psychopath created 200 accounts to use to stalk and terrorize me was finally enough to truly unsettle me. Up until a whole year of his online stalking antics, I wasn't too bothered. Yes, I was creeped out, but I wasn't fearing for my life until the call started coming somehow, and to this day, I have no idea how he got my home phone number. I never told him my last name or anything that would have led him to my personal information. My guess is that he must have acquired it from my last name, and he would have had to have gotten it from my Facebook, as I never told anyone what my surname was. How he found my Facebook, though, I honestly don't know. The moment he got my number, he would call my house at all hours of the day and night. I never answered it. My dad did all of the time, though. It didn't matter how many times my dad would hang up. Within 5 seconds the creep would be calling back, and this would go on in a cycle at every hour of the day. It got to the point where none of us were sleeping because he was calling non-stop every hour until the wee hours of the morning. At this point, I was beside myself with fear. I expected that any day he would show up at my door. If he had my home phone number, he certainly had my address. I became so paranoid that I put tape all over my webcams in case he somehow managed to hack them. No matter what, I couldn't shake the feeling that he could somehow see me, that he was always watching me, even though I knew he was safely across the continent from me. I spent many sleepless nights fearing that he'd show up at any second and try to kill me. We contacted our phone service provider, asking for them to trace the call. The number itself was untraceable, but they were eventually able to pinpoint the address of the caller. Sure enough, it was coming from the state of which I knew he lived, because he had once told me. I knew without a shadow of a doubt it was him doing this, but what could I really do about it? The cops wouldn't care about some threatening phone call and messages from a creep miles and miles away. It went on for 2 years. I clued my family in as to what was happening immediately once the call started, but there was not much else we could do besides block the multiple numbers he'd call from, and eventually just unplug the phone altogether to get a decent night's sleep. Needless to say, I eventually reached the end of my rope. My cyberstalker, his psychopathic as he was not the brightest crayon in the box. Before he began his reign of terror on me, he had revealed all sorts of information about himself. He even posted them online. I knew what state he lived in, his parents' names, his full name, and whatever else. Call it the typical hubris characteristic of a not so smart psychopath. He made it all too easy for me to turn the tables on him. I went from avoiding him and ignoring him to actively stalking him back. After doing some digging and creeping of my own, I was able to acquire personal information of his. It honestly wasn't very hard finding his parents' phone number. I had a last name, and he had once told me their first names. Bingo, he was a 20-some-year-old that I knew still lived with them. I thought at the very least it was about time his family found out what he'd been up to. A call was made to them, revealing everything, and I do mean everything. I don't know for sure if they ever got the message. It was left as a voicemail since nobody answered, but I assume the phone call had its intended effect because it's been years and I haven't heard a peep from him since. I hope he got the help he needed, but I frankly don't care of what became of him, so as long as he's not tormenting anyone else. In hindsight, it's pretty funny that ring him out to his parents was enough to stop him, but not all too surprising for a 20-some-year-old. He was incredibly childish, so psychopathic. Cyberstalker, let's not meet ever for your sake, because I am not afraid of you any more. Halloween night several years ago, I was followed home by a stranger. I work at a large mall about an hour away from home. The stores closed at 10 p.m. and the only bus home ran every hour and only dropped me off 2/3 of the way home, and I would have to walk the rest of the way. This usually happened between 11 and 1 a.m. at night, depending on if I could get the store closed down on time and if the bus wasn't too packed for me to get on. I'm not a small woman. I'm fairly tall and fairly round, and not particularly attractive. My uniform was just a polo shirt and black trousers, flat shoes, all covered with a thick coat. I didn't see him get on the bus. To be fair, the bus was packed and noisy, and the Walkways were crowded. I did my best just to block it all out with my headphones. And staring out the window, I'm not a people person, and having been at work for 12 hours on a busy day surrounded by these same, I was just pissed off and desperate to get off the bus and be alone when we finally got to my stop, and I managed to struggle my way to the front of the bus through people that refused to move. I stumbled into the night air and breathed a sigh of relief. A couple of people got off the bus behind me, and I started up the hill, crossing the road to continue up a side street that led to my road. This side street is very long and has offshoots into residential streets on very steep hills. Going down the street itself is lined with small shops, and there's a high grassy bank on the opposite side that has houses along the top, so it feels very isolated. After the shops close, very few people get off at my bus stop this time of night, and even fewer head in the same direction. Those that do cut off and go down one of these hills long before I get to the hill that leads up to my building. Now the street isn't very well lit. The street lamps are few and far between. Several of them are motion activated, so they don't even turn on until you're right on top of them. I've walked home in the dark this way 1,000 times, and I've walked to work this way at 3 o'clock to 4 in the morning 1,000 times too for a different job. Whilst I always enjoy the cool night air, I'm not afraid of the dark, and I love how bright the stars are where I live. I don't loiter, I walk fast so I can get home and shower ASAP. This night I noticed someone walking behind me. I usually do because, like I stated before, very few people walk this way at this time of night. I was aware of him and waiting for him to turn down one of the side streets. He didn't. It felt a little weird, but I'm not the only person that lives in this area, so maybe he just isn't regularly walking this way this time of night, so I've just never seen him before I get to the medical surgery at car park at the bottom of my hill and cut across it. As always at this point, I know if he also heads up my hill, I'll need to worry a bit more. This hill goes alongside the surgery, and then there are high walks on my side of the street that block off the flats in the other side from my road. They can only be accessed from the road before mine. At the top of the hill, this wall ends and turns into an alley that runs parallel to my building. The opposite side of the road has multiple closed pubs, a corner store, and an old church that has been converted into a mosque, which is also closed. There are even less street lamps here, and my building is surrounded by a metal fence with 20 or so feet of grass that slopes down at the entrance of the building where the doorway is lit up. The point is, it's isolated, and the only reason someone should be up here this time of night is if they lived in my building. This guy crosses the car park after me, and now I'm feeling concerned. I know he doesn't live in my building. There are 9 flats over 3 floors and 10 people. I know all of them, and they know me. We would recognize each other even in this level of darkness. So I walk faster up the hill, hoping to get into the building before he catches up. He starts walking faster too. I can hear him gaining on me, and by the time I get to the gate, I know he's too close for me to be able to open the door and get inside before he's on me. The building is dark, and I know everyone is in bed. It makes me feel all alone, and at this point I myself, so thinking quickly, I cross the road and walk further up the hill behind parked cars. I use the opportunity to swing my backpack off of one shoulder and grab my keys. I wait for him to follow me and get behind the cars too, so it will just take a bit longer for him to be able to cross back over before I bolted across the road. Throwing open the gate, I swing it hard behind me because he's now running at me, and I think it will either latch before he can catch it, or it will hit him. Either way, it will buy me a few seconds. I slide down the slope, barely staying on my feet because it's dangerously slippery when it's wet. I turn the corner at the bottom and slam my key card on the reader, pressing hard on the heavy door before it beeps so it will open that much faster. The door is heavy and on a fire safety hinge. That means I can't slam it or force it closed. The stairs are a couple of steps into the building, and to the left I live on the top floor. It's not a big building, 3 flats on each floor, 2 flights of stairs. It's also a concrete stairwell, so every little sound echoes and can be heard behind closed doors. I get inside the building and immediately bolt up the stairs. I'm only a few steps up when the door flies open behind me, and this guy comes after me. Feeling a bit more secure now that I'm in my building and only a few feet from my neighbors, I spin around before he reaches me and slam my heavy backpack into him. He falls back to the landing and manages to catch himself by grabbing hold of the handrail. I scream, "What the?" at the top of my lungs, and hold my bag in front of me. Now we're inside, and the stairwell is lit by the motion-activated lights. I get my first proper look at him. He's a bit taller than me. I'm 5 feet 8 inches. He's old enough to be graying. His clothes are weird, all made out of that weird waxy materials some weatherproof jackets are, and he's wearing heavy boots. I don't recognize him at all. He looks up at me with wide eyes as I stare him down. I'm fully prepared to kick him in the face and throw my bag if I have to. I don't want him to be able to follow me into my flat, so I stare him down. He begins to stutter, hands ringing all over the handrail and ducking his head a bit. He's trying to look pathetic and harmless. He mutters something about visiting his son. Like I stated before, 9 people other than me live in this building. None of them, other than myself, were young enough for him to be their parent. Even if his son did live here, how would he know to follow me off the bus to get into my building? Why did he follow me when I moved away from my building, and why did he chase me? He could have walked to the building and buzz up to his son for him to let him in if it was true. I began shouting at him to get out, repeating those 2 words over and over again, sprinkling in, "I don't know you, and you don't live here." He continues muttering, making his excuses, but I shout over him when I hear the neighbors moving around and coming towards their doors, probably to look through their pee holes. I began to back up the stairs. My neighbor right at the bottom of the stairs behind the man opens her door, leaving her chain on, and peers through at us. She asks me if I'm okay and if she needs to call the police. The guy spins to stare at her, his hands out in a stop motion, and I hear another neighbor open his door behind the stairs, also on the ground floor. He calls out to ask if everything is okay too, and I just yell out to the both of them, "He followed me home. I don't know him. He won't leave." I'm now at the top of the first set of stairs, still looking down at him. My male neighbor starts yelling at him to get the out, either more intimidated by the man than he was me, or realizing he was outnumbered. He begins trying to open the front door. You have to press a button to get it to open, and he clearly doesn't know this. Further evidence that he's never been here before. Feeling more secure now that I'm not alone and that he's trying to leave, I bolt across the landing and up the final flight of stairs, and I get my door open before we're locking it behind me. I was dripping sweat and very close to a panic attack. I dragged my Hoover to the front door and propped it up just in case someone tried to open my door. I would hear it fall. I didn't sleep very well at all, listening to every sound in the building, and luckily I didn't have work the next day. I woke up at about 6 a.m. to a lot of sound in the building's landings. I could hear people opening every bin, chute room, and coming back out again. I peered through my peephole to see uniformed policemen searching the common areas of the building. I didn't call the police, but I assume one of the neighbors downstairs did. The bin rooms are fairly large, so I imagined they were checking to see if someone was hiding in them. I don't know for sure, and I didn't ask, other than asking me if I was okay when we saw each other next. The neighbors that helped on that night never said anything else about it. I don't know who he was or what he wanted. I've never seen him again, and I stopped working at that shopping center a couple of years later. I do feel guilty for not calling the police, just in case he had done this before or since. And maybe whoever the victim was didn't manage to get away, but at the time I just wanted to forget about it and move forward. At the age of 12, I started babysitting for family friends who had 3 daughters ages between 4 and 7. They lived in a cul-de-sac where nearly every home housed a young couple with children in elementary school. The neighborhood was extremely close-knit, like the 1950s American block party communities. They had a communal policy on using one another's toys. Any kid could use a play structure in someone else's yard at any time without asking. Shortly after I started working in the neighborhood, they revised the rule too. Any time a family is using a babysitter to watch their kids, to ensure I would not get overwhelmed supervising a swarm of kids that I wasn't paid to watch. It was thus more or less known when parents were going out and leaving someone else in charge of their children. I was welcome to take the girls to play in any other yard as they wanted. Their parents even gave me permission to let them play in someone else's yard or sandbox independently if I needed a short break. Being an avid babysitter's club reader, I didn't leave the girls outside unsupervised ever. I would wait until someone else wanted a water or bathroom break and then corral everyone inside temporarily. Similarly, when the girls wanted to play in the treehouse owned by an older couple a few doors up the street, I climbed up despite a slight fear of heights and crouched in the little treehouse with them despite feelings of claustrophobia to follow my own rule. I don't recall whether my everyone inside, everyone outside together rule preceded the first art interaction I had with the immediate next-door neighbor or not, but when the police questioned the girls I babysat years later, they said nothing bad ever happened when I watched them because I set up that weird, sometimes annoying rule one day while playing basketball with the girls in the driveway. The next-door neighbor came outside in a baseball cap and sunglasses and sat down on his second-story deck to read a paperback. I later noticed he turned his chair around 180 degrees to face us and the basketball hoop. I couldn't tell if he was looking at us. He had no reaction to me staring at him, flipping pages in the book like someone would when reading. This behavior repeated every time we played basketball. For the 5 years I watched the girls, eventually, once I noticed him in the chair accessories on, I would suggest a game we could play inside or in the front yard, but out of view. The strange neighbor was familiar to me as he went to my church. I've never seen someone kneel in a pew, head bowed and hands folded with the same level of intensity before or since once when my family was seated behind him. The priest came over to ask me to leave the children's mass during the homie because the usual person was out sick. This guy turned around and glared at me like I personally set out to interrupt his prayer time. When I worked in the church NAS during various masses, I would often make eye contact with him as he waited in line outside the nursery door to use the restroom. From what I gleaned from our family friends and other people in the neighborhood, the odd basketball observer was a nice guy who gave up his apartment and job in the city to move in with and care for his sick, elderly mother since everyone thought he was great. And since he went to church, I figured I was in the wrong for finding him creepy. Even as young as 12, I was used to guys in their 40s and 50s asking me to go somewhere with them or driving by slowly as I walked, biked, or jogged to make LW comments. I figured I was projecting those experiences onto this awkward, quiet guy who was not doing anything wrong. For instance, I was certain that if the guy next door was a creep, he would not miss the opportunity to watch with sunglasses on and book in hand while the kids and I went swimming each summer when the family opened their above-ground pool. But he never set foot out on his deck when the kids and I donned swimsuits to play in the pool or backyard. I was more convinced I was conceited and mean then. When I was 15 or 16, I caught him looking in the window as I cleaned up after movie night, the girls and I put on a film after bath time, and instead of watching it theater style in total darkness, we kept some lights on so I could braid the girls' hair. The big screen TV we used for movies was located in an addition on the house with floor-to-ceiling windows, though my parents were OCD about shutting blinds and curtains when the sun went down to prevent people from looking in. Our family friends had no window treatments on the big modern windows. When I turned off the last light in the living room, a floor lamp right next to a window facing the neighbor's house, I could see into the darkness outside where the weird man sat on his deck in a chair in line with the window I was looking through. I looked over my shoulder and realized he had a line of sight on where the girls and I sat on the floor during the movie. As I looked back towards the house, I glimpsed him hustling inside. I would have doubted I'd seen him at all if he'd not left the chair in an unusual spot. After watching him turn the chair around to read during many a basketball match, I knew where the chair sat that night, facing the window into the family room. Was not the chair's usual position on the deck. After that incident, I would suggest playing board games in another room or insist on watching movies theater style to ensure he could not peep on what we did at night. When once the girls were asleep, I avoided the family room entirely because I was paranoid about being watched. If I wasn't in the kitchen doing homework or reading away from all the windows, I'd walk around the original first floor footprint of the house where all the windows had curtains. The first time the parents noticed my change in routine, they insisted I could watch TV or movies in the family room. I didn't mention anything to them because I was worried my concerns were silly and conceited. When I was 17, my family heard an evening cable news story about a man in our town caught in a police sting operation in which a woman pretended to offer her child to other men. Our family friends called a couple weeks later. They wanted to know how I knew the young man next door to them was not safe. He was the guy I'd heard about on TV, as they described it. The police found his blog where he wrote about his obsession with one of the girls who lived next door to him. It detailed his fantasies involving her and his plans to act on them. Many of his entries were focused on taking advantage of or kidnapping the girl, while the babysitter was in charge. In his head, babysitters were like the ones in old movies, talking to friends on the phone or making out with a boy they invited over instead of caring for the children. As it became clear, I did neither one of those things. His plans evolved to killing the babysitter, taking the girl, and getting out of Dodge after talking to the girls to ensure they were not victims. The police suggested I might know something to have acted the way I did. All the pieces, the frequent run-ins at the church when I had children in my care, or the weird things he did when he knew I was watching the kids next door, all fit together cohesively. I was relieved I was not mean-spirited or imagining things. I was perhaps conceited. The focus was not on me but on the children. But I was not crazy. I recognize I was not the person most at risk in this situation, and yet suburb predator and would-be murderer. Let's not meet again. Oh, and pro tip: read The Gift of Fear and The Babysitter's Club series. I live in the graveyard. It sounds really cheesy, but it's absolutely true. We've lived in this house for almost 8 years now. There's a lot to share. Our neighborhood sits on the original town cemetery from the 1800s. In the 70s, when they built the neighborhood, they only removed the graves where they needed to put in foundations and the sewer system. We didn't know that until we'd been living here for 3 or 4 years, but when I found out, it explained a lot of things while we were still in the process of moving in, having not even spent the first night in the house. I heard 2 little kids talking. I heard it clear as day. A girl probably around 10 or 12 and a little boy who sounded no older than 5. I only have 2 brothers, both younger than me, but still older than either of those kids sounded. It sounded like any younger siblings playing, and because it sounded so normal, I can't remember what was said. Obviously, the first thing I did was call out to them, and the playing stopped. I never heard them leave. I searched the house, and no one was inside. Everyone was in the backyard putting together or swing set. I told my mom what I'd heard, and of course she didn't believe me. I dropped it, and we moved on. Months later, I'm in my room trying to sleep when I roll over and see the reflection of a girl in my TV screen. I realized I was seeing her back, long curly blonde hair, and an 1800s blue dress. Somehow in my sleep-deprived brain, I thought it was my own life-sized doll, and I ignored it and went back to sleep. It was definitely not. It was the wrong color, and the doll was facing the TV, so I would have seen the face reflected, not the back of her head that was against the wall. I didn't tell my mom because that didn't work last time. After that stuff starts moving around, things fall off the stairs that are on carpet. The lights around the house turn off and on at random. I can hear people walking around all the time. Still, my mother does not believe me, which is really stupid because she does believe in ghosts. I affectionately named the ghost girl Lizzie because it just feels right. I don't know, I'm not afraid of her or anything. Finally, one day, I'm out with my friends doing teenager stuff at like 11 p.m. and my mom calls me, "Tell Lizzie not to scare the out of me." It turns out she'd gotten up to use the bathroom, and when she went back to bed, she'd seen a black orb hovering over her side of the bed. When she saw it, it quickly exited via the ceiling, and then she called me. Not long after that, we found the local news article about our neighbor and the cemetery. We also found out that during a flood one year, one particular casket kept popping back up, and it had to be removed, and that a lot of the neighborhood have headstones still visible in their yards. We're horrified because we definitely noticed some weirdly flat stones out near our garden, and only 5 or 6 feet from the fruit trees we planted. So now we all accept that we live with a ghost or 2. Weird stuff happens all the time. They stopped throwing stuff up the stairs, but now they show up in our Xbox Connect. They turn the sinks on, occasionally knock stuff over, and sometimes I hear them talking faintly. I haven't seen either of them since the first time, but I know they're still around. We treat them like family, talk to them, offer snacks, leave toys out to play with. Life is weird, and new people in the house never take long to notice. Also, lately I've been seeing a shadow cat hanging around. We have 2 cats already, but neither of them can disappear through walls. So there's that. Thanks for listening if you made it to the end. I have so many stories about our otherworldly guests, but this is long enough already. This happened several years ago when I was working in a downtown jail in a large city as a counselor. I worked a weird shift and got off at 2 a.m., so it was obviously dark when I got off of work, and most people on the roads were People who just closed down the bars downtown at this job I interacted with. Inmates who were various levels of ST stable and sober, and sometimes they were released at the same time as I was. Leaving work, the garage where I parked was a couple of blocks away from the jail, so I was cautious walking to my car. But I didn't usually have issues anyway. This particular night, I got to my car safely and started home, which was about a 25-minute drive. Very quickly after I pulled out of the garage, I noticed a car right behind me with its high beam on it. Followed me through downtown onto the highway and then exited at my exit. I wasn't too freaked out yet because I lived off a major road, but then it took every turn I did and pulled into my apartment complex right behind me. Well, at this point I'm getting concerned, but it is a big complex, so I just head toward my building. The car is right behind me. I usually back into my reserved parking spot, but this car is so close that I literally can't. I pull in forward. The car drives up behind me and stops, locking me in. At this point, I'm scared. I consider calling someone, but all of my friends are probably asleep because it's 3 a.m. Calling 911 feels like an overreaction, so finally I dial 911 on my phone, but I don't press the call button, and I step out of my car. A man gets out of the other car. He's tall, white, wearing a vest and a fedora. He stares at me, a 26-year-old blonde 5 feet 3 inches woman, for about 10 seconds and says, "Oh." He gets back into his car and drives off. It's still one of the weirdest encounters of my life. A year ago, my apartment complex decided they wanted to renovate my unit, so I had to move out at the end of my lease. I live in Denver and rent is pretty ridiculous here, so I started worrying about finding something affordable in my neighborhood, which I love. I posted on the Nextdoor app to see if anyone in my neighborhood knew of any affordable rent in the area. I immediately got a message from someone named Joe who said that one of the condos in his complex was going to be up for rent soon and that he knew the owner. He offered to get me in touch with the owner. I asked if he could send me pictures of the unit, and he asked if he could text me some pictures his neighbor took, because the chat function on the app is really slow. I now feel stupid for doing this, but I gave him my phone number. I kid you not, I received a phone call from an unknown number within seconds. I normally don't answer calls from unknown numbers, but I was expecting a call from a number that wasn't saved in my phone, so I answered it. I was completely bewildered when the person said, "Hi, it's Joe. How's your day going?" It took me by surprise, and I didn't know what to say. He started to shoot the on the phone, talking about how he works nights and how tired he is and how he takes care of his daughter while his girlfriend works during the day. I finally interrupted and said so about the condo. He pretty much disregarded that and said, "I don't think my girlfriend would appreciate me talking to you, but I don't have to tell her, right?" I said I have to go and immediately hung up the phone. As soon as I did, he started texting me. It was really bizarre and alarming to me. I blocked his number, and moments later he found me on Facebook and sent me a friend request. I'm 32 years old, but it was so disturbing to me that I called my parents to tell them about it and how it unnerved me. And the worst part is that on Nextdoor, even if your exact address isn't listed, your complex is, and I was pretty certain that I didn't have my address visible on my profile, but I checked, and sure enough, my address and unit number were public. Unable to contact me any other way, he started messaging me again on Nextdoor, asking if I wanted to go on a walk with him. You can't block or report people on the app, so I deleted it one night a month or so later. I had a knock on my door at around 10 p.m. on a weeknight. I looked out my peephole, but I couldn't get a good enough look at the person. He had his head down slightly. Either way, I don't answer the door for anyone I'm not expecting, especially not a random guy at 10 at night. Feeling panicked, I called my neighbor across the hall. She's an older woman, and we look out for each other since we both live alone. I asked her if it looked like he was a delivery guy at the door. She opened her door to get a look at the guy, and that spooked him because he literally ran away. I have no idea if this was the Nextdoor guy or not, but my gut tells me it was. This was a big wake-up call. I always felt like I practiced good online safety, but I didn't even know my address was visible on Nextdoor. I'll never be casual or lazy about privacy settings like that again. The Nextdoor incident prompted my dad to show up that very night to give me a few crowbars. Who has crowbars just lying around? You'd think I'd come from a mop family. Anyway, he gave them to me and asked me to hide them in different rooms in my apartment. Just in case. Writing this out, I realized that my dad has always been there to look out for me. This all started when I was probably around the age of 9 in the summertime. My brother was a year younger than me, and long story short, he convinced me to go look for some cats that he'd seen. I put my shoes on and followed my little brother out the door. We walked the streets in search of kittens, completely unsupervised. We lived in a small town, and my mom worked at Pizza King until 9 p.m. every weekday. My dad worked until midnight at Johnson Controls. That left our older sister, who was 13, to supervise, but she was always off doing God knows what. Because of these circumstances, I realized later we were the perfect targets: predictable schedules, lack of supervision, and comfortable in our tight-knit Midwestern neighborhood. My brother led me about 6 blocks away. When someone called out to us, I turned my head to find 4 young men leaning up against an old gray Todd door beater. They were standing outside of a known drug house, and they were smoking cigarettes, seemingly minding their own business. The one who called out to us closest to the passenger seat asked us, "Do you guys want some gum?" I stopped dead in my tracks, and my brother looked confused. They offered us gum. It was eerily reminiscent of our yearly stranger danger assemblies in the school auditorium. My brother and I looked at them for a second, but then turned around and started walking back the way we came, saying nothing. They yelled at us to stop, and we turned our heads and saw the driver getting into his car quickly and the passenger pulling the seat up to let the other 2 men in the back. As the engine started, we ran through the yard of a man whose lawn was always way overgrown. We tried to crouch low and lose them, but that loud engine of that old beater was getting closer. It didn't occur to me that they could see the grass moving as we crawled through it. We got up this time and ran at full speed, weaving in and out of people's yards to try to buy us some time. They followed. When I realized there was no outrunning a car, we took a straight line to one of our neighbors' houses and started beating on their back door. The car sped out from around the corner and stopped abruptly in the driveway, so we abandoned that idea and jumped over her fence. We eventually made it back to our house and thought we'd lost them. My mom's voice startled me from behind. "Where have you been? Where is your sister?" I think she'd come home because she was on delivery route that day. Sometimes when someone messed up a pizza, the owner would let my mom take it home for us if she was on delivery. That way we had something to eat when the pantry was empty. I started to tell my mom what happened, and she didn't look like she was too keen on buying the story until I stopped mid-sentence at the sound of a sputtering engine. I looked outside, and the 4 men drove past our house, slowly looking in our windows, making eye contact, and giving us a menacing look. My mom saw the man tried to close the blinds. Unfortunately, the track was broken, and she failed. She told us to stay inside for the rest of the day. She left after that. I can't explain why, so don't ask. She just did. Later that night, still no sign of our sister, and we were hungry. We made some mac and cheese and put on Hannah Montana to get our minds off of things, laughing at scenes that weren't funny. My nerves started to settle a bit, however. I kept seeing this tiny red light in the corner of my eyes coming from the window. I kept brushing it off. It could have been anything. After some time, I finally stood up and went over to the window to investigate, and I saw that this red dot was actually the light to a video camera. I gasped at the sight of this, and the person ran away immediately towards another man who was illuminated by a street light down the road. Naturally, I panicked and I cried. I ran outside and screamed my sister's name as loud as I could, and then I ran back inside. I called 911 first, and then my mom. I told them that there were 2 men with what I thought was a video camera outside on the street. The police showed up after circling the area, and they said they'd stake out for a couple of hours at the house on the corner, but that the person would probably be long gone. They never found the man, but the man found us over and over again. A couple of years later, my brother had the neighbor kid over for a sleepover. We all hung out in his room until late at night, laughing loudly and shooting BB guns at the ceiling and at each other. I left the room, and when I came back, my brother had told me that a hand had slapped the window and slid down, kind of like in a horror movie. I thought he was just trying to scare me, and I still believe he was probably lying. I was in the middle of telling him he was full of when I saw that little red dot again, silencing all of us. We ducked to the floor, at first silent, unbreathing, and then my brother crawled over and turned off the light. We stayed there for a long time until waking our parents up, but they found nothing. I passed it off as a prank. Another couple of years later, an Insomniac induced all-nighter. I was sitting in our sunroom with big windows all around and No curtains except for one to my right. I was reading a book. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and the whole house was asleep. I had my earphones in listening to my MP3 player when I thought I heard a loud noise over the music. I looked up startled, and I saw a man at the door watching me at 3 in the morning. This is the closest I'd ever been to him. I froze and stared at him. He was about 6 foot tall, and his hair was long and wavy, and over his eyebrows it kind of looked like bangs or a comb-over. Without enough gel, he was wearing a white hoodie and long blue pants that nearly covered his shoes. He looked like an aged version of the guy who offered us a piece of gum years before, and he had a blue digital camera in his hand down to his side. He walked away casually, without fear or haste, maintaining eye contact, and I followed him with my eyes past the window and behind the only window that was concealed with blinds. Out of my line of sight, I ran inside and told no one. I passed it off as a sleep-deprived hallucination for months, denying the nightmares and the cold chills before I finally came to the realization that this was the man I had seen years before, and I remembered something. That door's lock was broken. Those weren't the only times we caught someone outside of our windows. It happened for years, and it became an odd fact of life, but he seemed to be less interested at the older I room. It's strange, because he always purposefully revealed his presence instead of trying to stay discreet, and he even showed his face to me that one night. It makes me wonder what kind of pictures and videos he's captured and how long he would watch before making himself known to us. I used to convince myself that these were several unrelated instances, but it scared me more to think that one person had the capacity to invest that much time into us. It seems like an odd revenge for outrunning him years before. If you're reading this, you are the reason that I keep my blinds closed and can never own a houseplant or a sun room so creepy. Cameraman, if you're reading this, let's not meet. I was a first college student, an 18-year-old female working full-time and taking 18 units of college classes. My parents paid all my school expenses and didn't want me to work. They hoped I'd just concentrate on my studies, but I worked anyway, so I'd go to school all day, go directly to a fast food restaurant, Taco Bell, and then go over to my boyfriend's for a couple of hours, and then home. I was young and energetic and able to keep up with my schedule, so one night at about 10 p.m. the rest of the restaurant employees were already gone, and I worked alone. The last couple hours, a tall, large guy came to the window and asked what the cheapest menu item was. He ordered it. I took his money, closed the little window, made change, and handed it to him with his food item, then closed the little window. It was at this time I noticed one of his hands, his left. All the fingernails were at least an inch past his fingertips and filed into sharp, pointy claws. I thought to myself, my, that's odd. But whatever. He then asks if I could make change for a $5 bill so he could have exact change for the bus. I open the window, take his $5 bill, and turn to the cash register on my left that was about 18 in a way and was making change. I hear something and look back, and this guy's head is coming through the window, followed by arms and shoulders, and he's grabbing and clawing at me. I think he was trying to reach around me to get at the cash register, but when he grabbed me, I thought he was coming in to perhaps assault me. Now, in hindsight, I could have done a bunch of effective things to drive him back. Instead, I was screaming and started pummeling him with my fists. I had brothers. I fought him off, grabbed the paper bills out of his hand, and drove him back through the window and shut it. I missed hitting him a couple of times and hit the edge of the counter with my pawns, and I had big bruises from that. He ran off. I called the police and then called the owner of the restaurant. The police came and I made a report. The owner didn't want any press and was upset I'd called the police. What a jerk. So a couple of days later, I'm in inorganic chemistry lecture, which is in a small amphitheater of maybe 150 students. The lecture is about to start, and the guy sitting next to me on my right drops his calculator on the floor right in front of me. I kindly say, "Oh, I'll get it for you." I pick it off the floor and hand it back to him right into his open left hand with the long claw fingernails. Cue my racing heartbeat. I pretend that I don't know it's the guy who robbed and assaulted me. Coincidence? Not likely. So as soon as class ends, I raced past 5 or 6 people to my left, practically flew right over them, and once I get to the main aisle, I looked back at him. He raised his arms with a clawing motion towards me and growled at me and was in pursuit of me. I took off out of there. The next time I went to that class, he tried to sit as close to me again to intimidate me, and it was working. I decided to call the police. from home that afternoon, and I explained to them the situation. The guy seemed to be following me around campus, and it scared me. I did not know if you'd followed me from school to my workplace to attack me there. They were many miles apart. The police have undercover police watch me at school before chemistry, so I can point out my stalker. I had to tell my professor the situation of why I had people watching over me. The plan was to sit in the grass outside my chemistry class, and when I saw the guy give a nod and walk away into my class, he didn't show up the first stakeout, but he did the second day. They arrested him. Now the restaurant owner dropped the robbery charges as he didn't lose anything and didn't want the press. Nobody asked me, and I was the one attacked. The police told me they warned him to never look at me or talk to me ever again, and if I saw him they will arrest him and keep him in jail. I never saw him again. He dropped the class. My professor gave me a B even though I never got better than a D on the tests. He had a lengthy rationalization of why I deserved it, but deep down I know he felt sorry for me. Fortunately that helped because I was awful at chemistry. Stalker or not, I gave 2 weeks notice to the restaurant, and every remaining night I worked. My parents would sit at an outdoor table and play cards until I left for home safely. From age 13 until almost 15, I had a paper route. I delivered papers to people's doors 6 days a week. All of my customers, aside from the occasional grumps and chatterboxes, were absolutely wonderful. Most of them were older, and so many of them were so happy to see me every day just to have someone to talk to. Many of them would leave me granola bars, water bottles, and even tips. Winter holidays were a great time because everyone who could left huge tips. It was a pretty good first official job. Eventually, some of the snowbirds moved back and became my customers. One couple, Louise and Gerald, will always stick out in my mind. They started off normal, pretty friendly people, but I noticed one Sunday, the only day I had to get up early to deliver papers, that Gerald was outside. He chatted me up. Nothing unusual because it was so early and because I'd usually go right to bed after I was done. I was wearing a Britney Spears shirt and a pair of polar bear pajama pants. He complimented me and said I was dressed cutely. I was confused because it was pajamas I just threw on randomly. I was confused by the compliment, but I just went on about my day and didn't think much of it. Something else to note, his wife Louise was always smiling. I couldn't pinpoint why, but it always unnerved me. In retrospect, it gives me the meek and mild and subservient traditional wife vibes. Anyway, I had noticed that in their garden there were 3 different dog headstones that all said faux on them. I was kind of confused as to why they all had the same name, but I figured multiple people had bought them and they wanted to be polite, so they put them out anyway. One day Louise was out and she had her dog with her. She introduced the dog to me as they had just adopted her, and guess what they named her? Faux. All of the dogs they had were named Faux, and they were all Shelties just like that one. I thought that this was weird and I told my mom about it. She told me not to be so judgmental, as it was probably one way they dealt with grief. Here's the thing, they kept trying to get me to come inside. They'd invite me in for tea, which is not really something people do where I'm from. Coffee and donuts is a little more commonplace, but even that isn't something people do on a regular basis. Or they'd invite me in to talk to them. I'd always decline because I had more papers to deliver and I wanted to go home. Gerald kept complimenting my outfits even when they were pajamas. One morning he did this while getting closer to me and eventually touched my shoulder. I was like, well, I got to go, and I left. I didn't tell my mom at the time, as our relationship was good at that point, and I feared that telling her of any concerns that I had would make her not trust me or make her mad. This was also at the tail end of my CSA, which she doesn't know about to this day. I thought maybe I was just paranoid. Then right before I moved and I gave up my paper route, a really bizarre incident happened. It was a Sunday, the last Sunday I had the paper out to be exact, so I was out early delivering papers. I mean, it was still kind of dark out. Gerald was outside. He complimented my outfit again. Getting all creepily close, he invited me inside, and I said I really don't think my mom would appreciate me being gone for longer than she expects. She's strict. Which wasn't the whole truth, but you got to do what you got to do. He seemed to get kind of annoyed and just asked, wouldn't your mom just prefer that you respect your elders and not turn down an invitation? I felt the color drain from my face, and I knit out so quick I muttered something about how I really had to hurry along because my dog was sick. I heard him say some compliments about how my hair looked pretty. I have very wavy and curly hair that gets very puffy and voluminous when I'm in the humidity, and he would bring it up a lot, saying that my hair reminded him of the ADS. I booked it to the next house as quickly as I could without running. I didn't see Gerald after that, but I did see Louise, and she never stopped inviting me to come inside and play with Foe or have tea. I always declined. She seems disappointed every time, so that's my weird paper route story. Maybe I'm paranoid, but Gerald and Louise had some funky vibes. I had a stalker in junior high and high school. This was back in the early 2000s, without being too specific as far as I know. This guy is still out there somewhere. We met each other through an extracurricular activity group, and he struck me as a shy, quiet guy. I was rather shy myself for the time being. We had only seen each other at these extracurricular get-togethers maybe once or twice a month. I don't remember when it happened or how, but we exchanged phone numbers, and he asked me to go dance with him at his high school. Since he was maybe 2 years older than me, surprisingly, my mom agreed, and I was genuinely excited. The day rolled around, and we arrived at the town where the boy lived. The dance happened, and we danced together pretty much exclusively from what I remember, and maybe only once did we dance very close together. Maybe a couple months down the road, I had the opportunity to invite him to see a movie with my sisters and I, which he accepted, and my parents agreed would be fine. All that happened at the time was we exchanged a few pleasantries before and after, but besides that we only watched the movie, and I wouldn't even really consider that to have been a date. After a time, the boy started calling me almost every week, which was fun and nice at first, but he was exceedingly awkward. Despite how long we've been communicating, and continued to be just as awkward to talk to no matter how many times we spoke. His voice was always very low and soft, and he spoke almost exclusively in short sentences, letting me do most of the talking. However, there wasn't much going on in my life, so we ran out of things to talk about pretty quickly, but he often kept me on the phone for about an hour each time. It came to be that after a time I would get sick of talking to him. He didn't really contribute to the conversations, and I didn't have an interesting enough life to carry it on by myself. Before anyone gets mad at me for leading him on or whatever, I was a dumb teenager raised to be nice and pleasing and not to cut people off when it suited me. One day, I asked my mom if she could just call me to dinner or something when I felt like the conversation had petered out enough, and she agreed. That became my out for a long time. In addition to the phone calls, the guy also had my home address and email too. He would send me mostly funny chain letter type emails, and occasionally would write me a letter. The frequency of those was never enough to bother me. That the phone calls were really wearing me down. Later on, we moved to a different state during the summer, and the guy weaseled my new phone number and address out of me. I was kind of hoping that he'd lost interest at this point, but that was not the case. The phone calls continued, and I continued having my mom shout me down to dinner or other random things. After 15 to 30 minutes of awkward, mostly one-sided conversation, one afternoon, out of the blue, our doorbell rang, and I answered it. Being the closest one to the door, of course, to my surprise, the guy was there at the door, along with a super tall male friend of his, whom I didn't know or recognize. I greeted the guys with a smile and asked them what they were doing there. I didn't think it was weird at first, but the longer this interaction went on, the stranger it became. For one thing, neither one said a word, and they both came towards me like they were going to push past me into my house, but once they noticed my parents were there, they kind of stopped and looked at each other as if they didn't know what to do now. Me, not getting the gravity of the situation, invited them in and showed them the comic book I'd been working on since the beginning of that summer. If the guy spoke at all, it was only very briefly, and his friend said nothing, nor was he introduced to me, despite having driven supposedly from his hometown, which would have been more than 100 miles away. Mind you, they only stayed for maybe 5 minutes, and then they both left. Only later did I fit the pieces together and realized that the picture it made was dark and sinister. I decided after we moved to a different house that I wouldn't give him my forwarding address any longer, but he still had my home phone number. Since that hadn't really changed. Maybe a year or two after the surprise visit, I was home from school at our new house when the phone rang. I answered it, thinking it could be one of my friends from school, but it was the guy. I sighed, being unwilling to just tell him I didn't want to talk, and I sat on the stairs with my chin in my hand, wishing my mom would come home so she could get me off the phone. After a while, this guy asked me what was wrong, because I wasn't talking that much, and I kept yawning or sighing. So I said, "I'm just tired." "You don't look that tired," he replied. My eyes darted to all the windows I could see from where I sat on the stairs. Could he see me? Where was he right now? How did he find our new house when I hadn't told him the address and we weren't listed in the phone book? I suddenly blurted out, "I have to go." I hung up the phone, ran up the stairs, locked myself in the bathroom, and called my mom. I was terrified that the next thing I would hear was glass breaking and him coming to find me in the house. My mom told me not to move and that she would be home in a few minutes. I should have called the cops, honestly, the next time. He called only a few days later, and he acted like he hadn't been a creepy at all. Just one phone call ago I told him flat out that if he ever called me again, I would call the police. I am still afraid of this guy. I don't know how he found me, and I'm a little afraid he could find me again. I'm no longer a huge pushover and state my boundaries whenever people push me, but I don't honestly know what I'd do if this were to happen again, nor do I know what he would do if he found me. When I went home for 3 weeks about a month and a half ago, my dad decided that we should do a bit of night fishing. I'm not a huge fan of night fishing, any sort of fishing really, or my dad for that matter. Our personalities are way too similar, and if you leave us together for more than an hour, there may be blood left over by the time he and I are done playing several dozen rounds of fisticuffs between the stubborn arguing and shouting. Anyways, my dad decided to take me to this river up by our new house that they had just finished building. My mom and brother stayed behind as we traced through the dark woods. Now my family lives in Oregon, and the river was about 1.5 miles in front of my family's property, over a massive fallen trees in stumps that I easily tripped on, not knowing the lay of the land. My that merely scoffed at me and reminded me that city living makes you soft. He didn't say it just like that. That's something along those lines, like some stereotypical cowboy out of an old Wild West film. I blame the fact that I didn't know the area as well as he did, and it just spiraled downhill from there. And arguing broke out between us, making the peaceful night loud and chaotic. We didn't stop arguing the entire way down to the river, my father critiquing my less than Christian lifestyle while I criticized his manner of parenting my 20-year-old autistic brother. When we got to the river, we finally settled into an awkward, tense silence as we got our gear out. I knew that this fight was far from over as I sat down on a fallen tree stump and shivered my ass off. I had lived in a warm climate for over a year, and honestly coming out here was probably him punishing me for even leaving the Pacific Northwest. We refused to talk to one another as our lights danced across the water when my dad suddenly stood up, his light landing on the other side of the river. There on the other bank stood a man looking right at us. He wore a bright orange t-shirt and a pair of scraggly jeans, but for the most part looking pretty average if you counted the machete hanging from his belt. My dad snapped at me to start packing all our stuff up, and so I followed his command as my dad started shouting at the man across the river. Their conversation was mostly lost to the roar of the white-capped water, but I could see the man making agitated sweeps with his hands every time I dared to peek there. Voices grew, and my fear grew with it. My father has never been one to carry protection in the woods, hence why I was born. This man was armed and possibly dangerous with that machete, and while we had the river between us, it was shallow. It had plenty of places to cross, and even if it was snow runoff, I had no doubts this man could be behind us in mere minutes had we wandered onto his property by mistake and just not have known it. Drop the gear and let's go. My dad snarled at me as I took one last look up to see the man starting to walk into the river, his hand flitting against his weapon. My dad put a firm hand on my shoulder and led me back into the woods towards our house. My dad is an ultra marathoner. He runs like it's going out of style, and my mostly out of shape self probably wouldn't have been able to keep up if I hadn't been so terrified. I couldn't hear if the man was coming after us, my heartbeat being so loud in my ears, but I'd followed my dad so closely I almost ran into him several times. Finally we found our road and made a break for my parents' house. As soon as we were through the front door, my dad had locked the doors and was keeping a vigilant watch out the windows, making sure no crazy men with machetes were creeping up on our house. Finally, when he figured there was no guy wearing an orange t-shirt, we sat down and began to talk about our experience with my mom. We avoided the part where we had been arguing, but told her everything else. We went to bed without apologizing, and I honestly felt horrible the next day with the only gun he owned, my father, and I walked back out into the woods after calling the police. They said that there was a guy who did enjoy scaring people off of the forest land in the area and that we shouldn't be too concerned. Feeling a bit sheepish, we went back to the place where we had left our gear, both of us apologizing for our lackluster behavior the night before. When we returned to what we believed to be the spot, we saw that our fishing poles had been bent and all the line had been draped from tree to tree, and the tackle box was gone. However, my dad and I didn't fight again for the rest of my trip home, so thanks for bringing a temporary truce between my dad and I. Crazy man, but let's never meet by the river again. I recently moved to Weed, California for work. I'm a hiker and love exploring, so naturally 2 days ago I decided to go hike the mountain on one of my days off. I'm not entirely sure why, but I decided to drive my car very deep into the forest surrounding the base of the mountain as far as the dirt road would allow me. It was around 3 p.m. with a clear sky, so I was very confident and enjoying the scenery as I got out of my car and started my hike heading closer to the mountain. At first it was your regular everyday hike, lots of birds and squirrels around, that smell of nature that fills your lungs as you walk across the terrain. It wasn't until I reached a small dried up river that I noticed something was off. As I stopped to look at the dried up river and take pictures, I noticed that it was very strangely quiet. There were no birds chirping, no signs of squirrels or other animals, and even the sound of the wind you hear when you're on a mountain seemed to be completely gone at the time. I thought it was just an odd coincidence and started walking up alongside the river, but as I kept walking and being able to hear my own footsteps, I couldn't shake that feeling that I was being watched. Not the kind of feeling that makes you think someone is outside your window watching you, the kind of feeling that makes you feel multiple people or things or observing your every movement, studying you. I've never had that kind of feeling in my life, but what happened after made me completely forget about that feeling. I suddenly started to hear something out of nowhere that sounded like angelic humming or maybe a song with no lyrics, but it also sounded strangely electric, like the sound telephone lines make. It wasn't very loud, but enough to make me look in the direction that it was coming from. I looked to the other side of the dried up river that had multiple trees and other foliage to see someone or something looking straight at me. It almost looked like a ghost with it looking completely white, but this thing was very clearly there. It almost looked like it was wearing a robe, but I couldn't see any feet, hands, or even a face. Although it had an oval head, however, I could feel it looking straight at me, almost as if it was trying to remember my every detail. Even from far away I could tell that its entire body had a weird texture, almost like porcelain, but if porcelain was a silky fabric, it was very obviously not human. I was very understandably in complete shock and terror, frozen in place, kind of scared. We both looked at each other for what felt like forever, but it was most likely around 20 to 30 seconds. I very slowly started walking backwards. I don't think I took more than 2 steps when it tilted its head as if it was curious or even surprised at what I was doing. All the while I could still hear that electric angelic humming, and I swear it got a bit louder when I took those steps back. When I turned my head to look behind me to make sure the way was clear so I could run, the song suddenly stopped. It was abrupt, without any warning. This shocked me, and when I turned back to look at the thing, it was gone. There was no sign of it anywhere. As soon as I saw that it disappeared, I ran as fast as I could, following the path I took back even after it had disappeared, and while I was running I could still feel like I was being watched from all sides. I almost tripped a few times with how fast I was going. When I got back to my car, the sounds of animals and the mountain wind suddenly came back, but I was still scared out of my mind, and I drove as fast as I could away from the mountain. I've never had anything paranormal happen to me in the past, and I've honestly always been very skeptical of stuff like that, but this experience has left me quite questioning a lot of things. I don't think I want to go back to that mountain. I've even had a nightmare about the experience. I'm not even sure what I saw or what to call it. In the fall of 2010, I decided to go back to college. I was a single mom of 3 boys, but they were all in school now, and me going back was finally possible. The school I went to is a regional campus to a very large university and located in a neighborhood that's known for crime, meth, heroin, prostitution, and whatever else you can think of, but it was only a 20-minute drive from my home, and I didn't feel unsafe about going there the first day. And first class were intimidating. I didn't know anyone and was a lot older than most students. I was 28 at the time. I sat down in the back of the room at a table, and a few minutes later a lady who was around my age sat down next to me. She was very skinny, smelled like cigarettes, greasy hair, sunken eyes, but she started to talk to me and seemed normal enough. She started off the conversation telling me that she chose to sit next to me because I was wearing the prettiest blouse in the room. Strange, but as an awkward person I leave a lot of leeway for people to say or do awkward things before I think too deep into things. She didn't have a backpack, any books, a pen, a notebook, nothing. She said her financial aid hadn't come through yet, but she didn't want to fall behind on classes and asked if she could share my book. They agreed and gave her a pen and paper. Also, after the first class she asked if I would mind going to the library with her so she could scan some of the pages to take home. I agreed, and we started to head to the library. She stops and looks at her phone and says her son just texted her and he needs her to come home to do something. She asks if I'll come with her. I tell her I have another class shortly and I can't go with her. I ask if she wants to go to the library first. She says no, that she has to get to her son, but she really can't go alone. I kept telling her I couldn't go with her, and she starts to cry. At this point we were in a common area outside, and the parking lot was to one side and the library the other. I tell her I need to go to the library and she's welcome to come talk whatever she needs, but I have to go. I didn't like being outside away from people with this woman anymore, and I was trying to get back to a busier area. She gets really upset, starts screaming, basically says you to me. She may have actually said you. I can't remember how the interaction went exactly because I was frozen in confusion by how quickly she transitioned from friendly then to crying and scared and to now screaming in my face a slew of hateful, angry things. I turn around to start walking to the library, and I called my friend so that I would have someone aware if this lady tried anything more than just screaming. I get to the library vestibule and I watch her through the glass doors. She's standing at the parking lot. Then a car pulls up with a man in it, and he's obviously upset with the woman. They're arguing, but I can't hear them from inside the vestibule. Eventually she gets in the car and leaves with him. The next day I was dreading class because I didn't know what this woman's attitude would be that day, but she wasn't there the next day. In the end she never came back to class. I didn't know her name or at the time how to look at a class roster, but looking back I'm fairly certain she was not enrolled at the school at all, and for whatever reason was trying to get me to leave with her. I wish I knew her intentions, but at the same time I'm glad I never had to find out. About 9 months ago I began working as a hospital security guard at a major hospital in my city. It's been the most exciting and enjoyable job I've ever had. I'm incredibly grateful for it, as I've made many new friends and accumulated countless stories to share. The saying, if you love your job, you never work a day in your life, really rings true for me. I've had such a variety of experiences, from arresting trespassers to dealing with mental health patients and searching for missing individuals. The list goes on, but those stories are for another day. Today, I want to talk about something different, my EXP experience with the paranormal. Before I started this job, I was already intrigued by the idea of paranormal activity in a major hospital. I mean, people pass away in hospitals every day, so you'd think it would be a hot spot for ghostly encounters, right? I wish I could say I've seen ghosts chasing me down the halls or bodies mysteriously moving on their own in the morgue, but honestly nothing quite like that has happened. Still, I wouldn't be writing this if I had experienced nothing at all. To give you a better understanding of the hospital's layout, let me explain where security is stationed. There are 4 main buildings. We cover the first is the main hospital, which houses the emergency room and over 1,000 beds for both kids and adults. We typically have at least 8 guards handling calls in this building, with 1 guard stationed in the emergency room at all times, since that's where most calls come from. It's worth noting that I'm in Canada, so anyone can come to the hospital for any reason free of charge. The second building, located across the street, is an 8-story medical clinic that requires just 1 guard. This guard also has to patrol the adjacent old clinic building, which is now primarily used for treating children with eating disorders. This is where the story I'm about to share takes place. The last building is the cancer clinic, which requires 2 guards at all times and is the closest to the medical clinic if assistance is needed. When I first started the job and was shown around the various buildings, the old clinic, which we'll call the Asbest Clinic due to its history of asbestos issues immediately stood out to me. It's a building that, in my opinion, should have been demolished long ago during my initial walkthrough. A fellow guard told me that this building was haunted by a young girl who took her own life on the second floor. He also mentioned that the basement was haunted. The whole building used to be a tuberculosis sanatorium back in the 50s and 60s, with tunnels in the basement that were once used to transport bodies. About a month ago, it was my turn to work at the clinic during a night shift, and I was determined to experience some paranormal activity. I had done countless patrols at the asbestos clinic before, but nothing much had happened aside from the elevators occasionally opening on their own, which was apparently normal. But that night things changed. I'd heard plenty of stories from other guards about strange occurrences in the clinic, but I had never experienced anything myself. I decided to do my patrol at 3 o'clock a.m., which is often said to be the prime time for paranormal activity. I began my patrol by walking around the exterior of the building, checking all the entrances to ensure they were locked. The building closes relatively early, around 8 p.m., so by then it should be completely empty. However, I noticed that one of the exterior doors was slightly open. This concerned me because it had been closed during my first patrol. The building doesn't have any interior cameras, so when something like this happens at night, I have to check every unlocked room inside to make sure no one is inside. I entered the building and started my patrol of the first floor, checking every door and hallway. No one was there. As I approached the elevator to go up to the second floor, I heard a faint creaking sound like a door opening. I immediately radioed my team lead, informing her that I'd found an open door and was hearing no noises. I told her I was going to conduct a thorough patrol, and she sent one of the guards from the cancer clinic, Fred, to assist me. After searching the first floor again and finding nothing, Fred arrived. He told me he would start searching the third and fourth floors while I covered the second floor and basement. As I was searching the second floor, I heard the same creaking noise again, the sound of a door opening. I radioed R to come down, still not considering the possibility of anything paranormal. We've had incidents of homeless people breaking in to find a place to sleep, though it's rare for them to target the asbestos clinic since it's usually locked. We searched every room on the second floor but found nothing. After thoroughly checking the entire clinic, we concluded that no one was inside. Fred returned to the cancer clinic, and my team lead made a joke that it was probably just a ghost. That got me thinking this might be the perfect time to continue my ghost hunting. I went back into the building, determined to capture some activity. I sat down in a chair on the second floor, waiting to see if anything would happen. After about 10 minutes of nothing, I got bored and decided to head down to the basement. The basement is an eerie place filled with tong that mostly led to nowhere. Now I decided to explore one of them since I'd never done it before, and it seemed like the perfect time. Once I exited the elevator, I made my way to one of the locked doors leading to the longest tunnel. Most of the tunnels were completely blocked off, but this one stretched on. I unlocked the door and ventured down the tunnel, taking note of my radio beeping to indicate that it had lost signal, a common issue in basement areas. As I reached the end of the tunnel, my flashlight started to flicker. I decided to stand still and listen, and to my shock I heard a blood-curdling female scream coming from the start of the tunnel. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned around, pointing my flickering flashlight back toward the entrance, and I started running toward the screen. When I reached the entrance, I tried to radio my team lead, but my radio still had no signal. I looked around the basement and noticed that one of the doors was open. This door was supposed to be locked, with only security having access to the keys. I looked inside the room, but there was no one there. My heart was racing. I closed the door and headed back upstairs to get a radio signal. I was still unsure if what I experienced was paranormal. Once I was back on the main floor, I radioed my team lead to let her know what happened. She sent Fred back to help me investigate the source of the screen. When he arrived, we went back to the basement. I showed him the room that had been opened, and we both noticed a very distinct and strong smell similar to that of a decomposing body. Having spent time in the hospital morgue, I was all too familiar with that smell. We searched the room, but we found nothing. Fred joked that the room might have been used for tuberculosis patients who didn't make it, but in truth none of us were sure what that room had been used for. We determined that everything was fine, and I decided I'd spent enough time in the asbestos clinic for one night. Ever since that experience, I've rushed through my patrols in the basement, as that smell still lingers every time I pass by that room. So what do you think? Was this a paranormal experience or something else? Should I investigate further? Let me know if you'd like to hear more of the stories that I've collected during my time working in the hospital. Hello, everyone. A series of events unfolded in my life, causing me to move out and live out of my car ever since a month ago. It's nothing new for me, however, as I've lived out of my car for 5 years prior in the past, and I've never had any encounters until yesterday. That is, something happened which shook me. There's this small beach on the coastline which has been my go-to sleeping spot on the southbound part of the road. There a whole lineup of cars and RVs, many other homeless, but also people coming to hang out because it offers a nice view of the bay. I usually sleep on this side. The people who come here like to bring their beers, play their music, and gather outside, but it's really chill and everyone keeps to themselves. Lately I've been having trouble sleeping and tend to knock out around 2 a.m. and not waking up until noon. The problem is on this southbound side the sun will bear down at 8 a.m., turning my car into a sauna in the morning. About 100 yards down on the northbound side there's this tiny hiking trail area in a vast lot just off of the road, and there's a few trees there which offers me shade well into the afternoon. There's also a park right across the street. It's a much more secluded area, but I've been sleeping there since last week or so. No issues at all. Typically only a couple other cars park around this area. Yesterday I pulled up to my spot around 12:30 a.m. and found this large 4x4 pickup truck parked there's another car parked across the road and a third one on the other end of the lot as well. I think no biggie. There's a second tree just in front of the pickup which works, so I'll pull up there, but it's only a 20t distance between us, and I'm in their direct line of vision. I realize now in hindsight it was a stupid move, but oh well. There's two people in the front seat playing their Ranchera SL mariachi music, sick, and there's also a dog left outside on a leash, possibly others in the back seat, but I couldn't confirm due to the windows being tinted. I never make eye contact and keep my head down the entire time. I first go take a leak in the forest, come back to grab my pillows and blanket from the trunk, and I hop into the back seat. I'd assumed that would throw off any paranoia they may be having, as they'd see that I'm just coming to sleep in for the night. Within 5 minutes they take off and drive up the road for a short distance before suddenly making a U-turn and returning back into the lot. They do some weird random driving in front of me, then pull back slowly and very close to my side. I roll down my window. The passenger has his window all the way down. He's asking me something in Spanish, and his English is nil. He is clearly drunk, coked up, bloodshot eyes, pupils dilated, and he's talking in a slight slur. He's also visibly angry, expressing intimidation via body language. I respond to him in English, so he asks if I'm Policia, and I'm like, what the no man, I'm just sleeping here, and I show him the pillow and blanket, but he keeps pressing me. No police come here. So I say to him, no man, police no come here, never, don't worry. I took my hand under my head as per the universal sign language of sleeping, again reiterating that I'm here to sleep, but he's getting frustrated and asks where I'm coming from. I'm trying my best to de-escalate the situation and talk calmly and nicely, and I'm even apologizing if I happen to bother them. I directly ask him, do you think I'm police? And he responds in the negative, shaking his head. I point up to the tree and explain, shade perimeter, shade perim my car, just so he knows why I decided to park in this spot, but he's pretending to not understand me and says, Kizia come here again. I tell him, no man, police don't come here, I sleep here every night. It's okay. The guy is pissed though and starts halfway flashing something in his hand from behind the car door. It was a very subtle gesture. I can't say for sure that it was a weapon, but he was definitely suggesting something. He then says, after today no more sleeping here, and he repeats it twice and then says, okay, all whilst he's pumping his chest and piercing his gaze in a menacing fashion. The driver floor the gas pedal, taking off in a frenzy. As they're taking off, the passenger that I've been talking to hangs out the window, looking back and mugging the living out of me before they get back on the road, hitting the accelerator at high speeds. I sat there for a good 10 minutes just so I don't run into them a second time. I then went to sleep near a Walmart. Instead, I didn't get their license plate, but since they also have my plate and know what I look like, it would probably turn sour for me if I reported them. Anyway, I spent the whole day dwelling on what happened yesterday, and I have a bit of a clue as to what made them trip out like this. My only plausible theory is That they didn't like me parking proximately to them, and they took it as disrespect. Anyhow, there goes a perfect parking spot. I moved into a large studio apartment complex a few months ago. I'm a single female with a 2-year-old daughter. My sister and a few of her friends came over about 3 weeks ago to hang out, have some beers, and play Cards Against Humanity. My studio has an enclosed patio safe for a door-ized opening. There's no gate or door. Since my child was sleeping, I had everyone chill outside on the patio. We were having a great time joking, talking, and listening to low playing music when the security guard entered my patio. "Hi there, are we being too loud? Has someone placed a complaint?" I asked. No, you guys are fine. I'm just doing my rounds." He lingered for a minute more and then strolled out into the night. We continued our activities and didn't really give him a second thought. He returned about 25 minutes later, right after most of the group had left. Only my sister, her friend Cody, and I remained. He was an overweight, late 40s, early 50s white male, and he wore glasses. He strolls into my patio once again and strikes of conversation. We learned that he's a retired cop that had to with the force after suffering a heart attack on duty. He states he had to undergo a quintuple bypass surgery, and after recovery, he started night security jobs. I felt sorry for him because of the medical history and sat and listened to him for quite a while. He must have stayed at least 30 minutes before my sister got uncomfortable and loudly announced that we were going to bed. He bid us good night and left. Once inside, my sister said that she didn't like the way that he was looking at me, and she thought that he took a liking to me. I initially told her she was reading into it too much and that the guy was just lonely and had a long shift ahead of him. A week and a half later, my sister is visiting again, and we're sitting inside my place talking. My studio has a black screen door which is visible to see through, and then followed by a wood door. I had the screen door locked and the wood door more wide open to let some air in. My sister is talking to me, and I have the sensation that someone is looking at me. So I glance up. The security guard is standing at the doorway of my patio, staring. I say hello, and he jerks forward as if expecting an invitation in or something, but I turn my attention back to my sister, and when I glance back again, he's gone. This week on Tuesday, I took a shower and threw on my red silk Japanese-style robe. I was washing dishes for about 25 minutes, and it poured myself a glass of wine. I turned from the kitchen to sit on my couch, and I strangled a scream. The security guard is almost pressed up against my screen door, staring straight at me through the foot-long crack of the wood door. I was so startled and shaken, but the first thing I did was make sure my robe wasn't exposing me. I ran up to the screen. "You scared me," I said with no emotion and no apology. He said, "I was just doing my rounds. My scalp is crawling and I'm still shaky." "Okay, well, I'm going to bed now," I said. He is still right up next to the screen door, all the way inside my patio, and he turns and looks at my beach cruiser parked against the wall. "Oh, you have a bike, you should put it inside because someone could take it," he tells me. "Yeah, I'll get to it," I replied. I pretty much slammed the door shut and lock it. I sit down with the wine and calm my nerves. I was shaken up, but I wasn't sure if he really was being a creeper or just a lonely individual that was looking for someone that had expressed interest after a debate with my friends and sister. I contacted the property manager. I was actually surprised at how quickly it escalated. They took my verbal incident report over the phone and just informed me today that the guy has been fired. The property manager told me to call the police if I see him on premises again. This happened circa 98. I was about 13. We lived next to a fence and heavily wooded area behind one of our local YMCAs. Being that we lived in a large city, there was a ton of crime and a few bodies had been found in these woods over the years. We had an extremely religious Christian neighbor that my dad was close with, as they were both single parents. She told my dad that there was a demon that lived in these woods as a result of negative energy from all the violence those woods had seen. I wasn't allowed to go back there, but I still would. Never at night though, and the few times I did, I would hear footsteps behind me or feel complete dread the whole way home, as I only used them as a shortcut to walk home, sometimes from a friend's house. I know this sounds silly, but even in a lit-up city, those woods were so dark. I get that woods are supposed to be dark, and what a stupid thing to say, but this was a different kind of darkness. I don't know how to describe it except for saying that they just felt evil. Anyhow, 1988, 13 years old. I did not have the easiest upbringing. My dad was in a constant state of anxiety We were poor. My dad always owed money to somebody, and my brother and I were pretty much neglected, and as all teens in the 90s seem to have been, I love my dad very much, but there was always some kind of negativity or hardship in his life, which in turn was reflected onto my brother and I because we lived with him. My mom moved out of state when I was 10. There was literally no solace, and I lived a stone's throw away from these woods. It first started with the reoccurring nightmares. A blackness would seep out of the woods like a fog. I could never get away fast enough. It would envelop me and drag me into the woods. I had this dream every night for months. My dad was convinced that we were under attack, whereas I thought that it was just him and the neighbor freaking me out with their theories. One night we were sitting in the driveway and my dad speed up old Fullo. We were having an argument. I don't even remember what it was about now, but we were going back and forth and just being nasty to one another, and I'll never forget it. My dad said, every time we do this, we just feed this thing that lives out in the woods. I laughed at him. I remember saying something to belittle him. I just can't remember word for word, but it was something that pretty much made fun of him and the thing in the woods. At that very minute, something started beating on the trunk of the car. It felt like two fists coming down on the trunk over and over. We both screamed. It got harder and louder. At that moment, I threw my arms around my dad and said, I love you, I'm sorry, and he said the same, almost like a chant it became, and as we said the words to one another, the blows on the trunk became softer and lesser until they disappeared altogether, and we were both left in tears. Later, when he inspected the car, there were dents that looked like fists on the back of his trunk. I knew the car was already beaten up to hell, but those were not there before. My dad has since passed away, but even if he were alive, he would never talk about this. The few times I tried to bring it up over the years, he shut the conversation down just as fast as it was mentioned. We moved short after that. I still believe in my heart and soul that those woods have evil living in them, and I live 3 miles away from them now. Sometimes I feel curious enough to try to go back and record to catch something, but then again I'm too terrified to even think about walking into those woods at night. For reference, I'm 20 years old and my younger sister is 16. We grew up in a small town in the western part of Maryland. I now know that the entire town is most likely on a ley line, but I don't count that to be 100% true. What I do know for sure that the town we grew up in was very, very weird, to say the least. Up until the age of 8, we lived in one house a few streets over from where my parents live now. I don't remember much from this house, other than sometimes seeing a large shadow cross doorways. As a kid, I also had an imaginary friend, Sarah. Sarah was blonde with green eyes and a white and blue Victorian dress, and couldn't have been older than 11 when we moved into the new house. Things started getting progressively worse, other than that fact that our new house was haunted by several spirits and had a demon in the basement. More on that in another post. I started seeing a shadowy figure following me more and more. I dubbed him the Top Hat Man. He never did anything other than followed watch, yet he terrified me. I can still picture him in my head to this day in the corner of my bedroom, but whenever I saw this spirit, said arrow was sure to follow, and he would leave as soon as she appeared. It got to its worst around 6th grade, and the last time I remember seeing both apparitions, I was doing homework in the dining room, and the Top Hat Man was watching me from across the living room. Sarah, acting almost as a guard dog, was sitting at the end of the couch, a barrier between me and the evil spirit, but this time he did do something. He opened his eyes. Dark red eyes stared at me as he started to silently jolt to where I was, but Sarah stood up, put her hand up, and when they touched, poof, they were both gone. That was the end of it for me. But a few years later I walked into my sister's room, and she looked terrified. At the time I was 15 and she was 11. I eventually got the truth out of her, and she explained how she kept seeing a shadowy man in a top hat and a little girl called Sarah for months. She would come up to me in my room, the kitchen, even at my grandmother's, once crying, saying he was watching her around. That time we also got our house blessed due to demonic activity in the house, and she never brought it up again after that. I don't know if it happened to help or not, but I think we're both too scared to bring it up. I really wish that was the end, but among many friend groups in high school and middle school, at sleepovers, hangouts, and lunches, I've had opportunities to share ghost stories as moody teens do, and my sister and I aren't the only ones with the same experience. A total of 10 other kids my age had the same exact thing happen to them, a tall shadow figure in a top hat, a blonde little girl named Sarah, everyone saying the same thing. They stopped seeing them around 11 or 12 years old. I don't know what's going on, I don't know why, it's truly unexplainable. How are all these kids seeing the exact same thing? Why is it happening in my town? Does it happen elsewhere too? If anyone has answers, please